Hello and welcome to The Radical. I'm Christina.
And I'm Nicole. On our podcast, we delve into the roots of metaphysical wisdom.
That's right, Nicole. Our podcast is all about exploring those fundamental truths and practices that nourish your mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, Christina, we want to make metaphysical concepts easy to understand and accessible, especially for those who don't have a ton of time to do all the research.
Right? We'll do the research as well as share our experiences and perspectives, hoping to empower you, our listener, to find balance and magic in your day-to-day.
Inspired by the essence of the word radical, proceeding from the root, let's explore the roots of well-being and self-healing together.
This is The Radical with Christina and Nicole, two metaphysical girls in the material world. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, Nicole. Welcome to our podcast today. We are talking about astrology and not just what it is.
Yeah. Is it legitimate?
Well, for our sakes, I hope so.
I know me and you both love astrology. So I decided in preparing for this podcast to look at some of the arguments against the legitimacy of astrology. So we hope, even if you're on the fence or don't really believe in astrology, that you can keep an open mind and hear us present sort of some facts, some history about astrology, and then we want to talk about, is it scientific? Is it legit? We have some studies that we found. So let's just see where this conversation takes us as we explore astrology.
As I was listening to you talk right there, I was, as you outlined the format of the podcast, and I like to dig into the history. And as soon as I started thinking that, I was like, oh, well, that's my Sagittarius moon. That's just really who I am. And I'm like, where did that thought come from? How readily that thought popped into my head to associate a characteristic based on my moon sign. So it becomes a part of just kind of how you relate to the world and how you relate to yourself. That's what astrology means to me. And I took a glance at Nicole's notes and they look amazing. I made a point not to read them, even though my brain was like, what is she going to talk about? So we have that to look forward to. And also today at the end of the podcast, we're going to be pulling 2 cards from the Medicine Woman Oracle deck. So stick around for that. So we'll get into the first segment here, which is basically the facts, the list, the just basic information about astrology. We're not going to go too deep into anything, but we will give you a nice overview. So just to start with the definition, it's the study of the movements and relative positions of celestial bodies, celestial. I don't know why I put an R in there. Celestial bodies, interpreted as having an influence on human affairs and the natural world. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
That's it in a nutshell. And one of the key words that I'll come back to as we sort of start discussing, is it legitimate or not, is that word interpreted. That's a real key word to pay attention to in that definition.
So to start, we'll talk about essentially the 2 main ways that the positioning of the sun in the constellations is done. There's the tropical versus the sidereal or sidereal, or I pronounce it another way, sidereal. But I'm going to say it's sidereal. Is that how you've heard it?
That's how I've heard it, yes.
So the tropical version, which is the one that Western culture is the most familiar with, because that is how the most Western cultures and astrology that we would use today uses it, which would mean that. Well, anyway, let me go back to the beginning. Two camps. So the starting point of the astrological year is at the spring equinox, the vernal equinox, which happens to be Aries. So some astronomers would use the 0 degrees starting point at the point when the sun's position against the heavens crosses over the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. So that happens every year at the spring equinox. The sidereal uses a fixed point so that the Earth stays still and the constellations shift. And you're gonna hear me read quite a lot. So I have my conversational voice and then my reading voice, and I'm going back and forth. But sidereal astrology uses the fixed starting point in the background of stars. So a fixed starting point in the background of stars. So what does that mean? That when I was born, the sun was not in Gemini. Because, and why is that? Because of the precession of the equinoxes.
I came across this too. It is amazing to me how we are able to measure and observe all of these things. It blows me away.
I think back to the huge stone structures that are being found all across Western Europe. Stonehenge, probably the most famous one, where they're like, what were they doing with these stones? And a lot of scholars are looking at it as they were using this as a fixed way to watch the stars, to watch the moon, to watch the constellations, and to kind of tell time based on the equinoxes and the solstices and other celestial phenomena that was happening. So the reason why there's a difference is because the Earth, not only does it rotate, it also the axis rotates, and it's spinning like a spinning top. And the cycle is every 25 and 700,000 years. 25,700. How do you say that? 25,700 years. That's it.
Yes. And what stuck out to me in my research was precession was discovered by the ancient Greeks. This wasn't something we discovered recently. And that, to me, is incredible.
Yeah. And we wouldn't have even been able to notice it if it wasn't recorded 2,000 years ago. So essentially what happens, because the Earth is spinning on its axis and it wobbles, this causes that spring equinox, the vernal equinox, to move gradually backwards against the star background. That is called the phenomenon known as the precession of equinoxes. So the rate, like I said, is at a rate of about 30 degrees every 2,160 years. So that's one full constellation, or one full zodiac degree there, every 30 degrees. So what does that mean? Like I said, that the sun is not literally in the Gemini constellation in June during Gemini season. And I read a story on this before saying that you can find information on this, and there are some sites and some resources that you can look into if you're interested in this, But because when both of these two types, well, we'll go into the types of astrology in a moment, when they were both created, they were the same. It was 2,000 years ago. So it's only been this past 2,000 years that it shifted. So when all the groundwork was laid down, that it was the same. The two zodiacs would be aligned only once every 26,000 years, but they were aligned 2,000 years ago when the zodiac was originally established. So more on that. So look up precession of the equinoxes if you are very interested in learning more about that. But did you see this bit here about the age of Aquarius?
I have heard all about, yeah, Age of Aquarius.
It's happening because this phenomena, the precession of the equinox, gives us this conceptual basis for the age of Aquarius, and then the dawning coincides with the movement of that spring equinox, the vernal equinox, across the cusp, the dividing line from Pisces into Aquarius constellation or star background. So again, if this is kind of piquing your interest, now go look up Age of Aquarius and
Mm-hmm.
exactly what's going on there. But that's because of that, what's going on in the heavens. Now, have you ever heard of the 13th zodiac sign?
No.
I was watching a little YouTube video and it was mentioned for maybe 5 seconds. And of course, I had to go find out what that was all about. So the 13th zodiac sign, you might come across it in your research, is O wait, Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus, ancient Greek serpent bearer. It has an astrological symbol, and it is a constellation. There's I don't even know how many constellations there are. Thousands? I mean hundreds? How many stars are there in the sky? And the sun does move through this constellation, but it's behind the sun from November 21st to December 18th. So uh some types of astrology, some schools, some thoughts of astrology. I guess I'm trying to think of what's the word I want to use to classify. Depending on what you're looking at, you might see mention of the 13th zodiac sign. But essentially, because the a circle is 360 degrees, and the Babylonians divided it up into 30, which is 12, is why we have 12 today.
Nice, even,
Nicole,
and balanced.
it's all math. Last night,
Mm-hmm.
Nicole and I were talking about something, and I was like, it's all math. It's all
Mm-hmm.
math, is what it comes down to. Um, so I know Nicole's going to talk about this more about the outer planets, but I had a while ago, we were looking at birth charts or something, and we were talking about sometimes you might see discrepancies in the assignments of Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, and just what signs they're assigned to, where they're associated with, and that's because they weren't visible as planets. So, as a star, the ancient Greeks from 400 BCE named Saturn the wandering star, Kronos. The Romans later changed the name to Saturn, which is their god of agriculture, but it wasn't fully discovered as a planet until 1610. Is that what you have, Galileo?
That sounds right to me.
Somewhere in
I
there?
noted, yeah, Uranus was discovered in 1781, Neptune 1846, and Pluto 1930.
Yeah.
But poor Pluto has been, I
Yeah.
guess, it's not a planet anymore. So,
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit more on that, but just know that when these planetary uh, importances and assignments were being made, not all the planets were visible. So some of the assignments and some of the meanings of these planets have changed and shifted throughout the years because we discovered more. So to go back to the beginning of astrology in Babylonian, Babylonian astrology. And this is 1800 BCE. They observed the seasonal movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets. They connected beliefs of divine intervention into everyday time and space. So the invention of the zodiac, 2,500 years ago, based on observations and mathematical calculations. They're the ones that divided the sky into 30 degrees each and started to begin to assign figures and names and specific meanings to uh each of the 12 parts, each of the 12 degrees. And shockingly, if you like to do a little more research into Babylonian astrology, they've decoded a lot of the tablets that they found and found that the names, characteristics, and meanings are still the same as they are today. A lot are
Wow.
still exactly the same. Yeah, fascinating reading.
Wow.
So,
The Babylonians also, and this is, I think, important to note, they were using astrology. One of the ways they used astrology was in a predictive manner. So they were looking to the stars and trying to predict and use it to come up with omens. And if there
oh,
was an omen, they would, in response, protect their king and they would put a fake king like on the throne. So if something happened, if somebody was coming to kill their king, they would kill the fake king and the real king would be protected. So that's just important to note that the
love that.
Babylonians really were trying to make predictions. And we'll circle back to that idea of making predictions with astrology, but this started with the Babylonians.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. I feel like I saw a little bit something, a little something on that, the fake king in
Mm-hmm.
Babylonian astrology. So there's other main types, other main cultures have different forms of astrology. We're just going to go through these very quickly and just mention a few differences. But if something is sparking your interest, go research a lot more for yourself. So Chinese astrology, which we have very familiar with. I feel like I've known about my animal being the rabbit. I feel like I've known that for ages. I feel like that's been very, very prominent in our culture recently. So the Chinese astrology, the person's fate can be determined by the major planets and the person's birth, along with the positions of the sun, the moon, the comets. They have fantastic, beautiful birth charts. If you're interested in that form of astrology, just gorgeous, detailed. Um, but the 12-year cycle of the animals was built from the observations of the orbit of Jupiter,
Wow.
right? So Jupiter around the sun divided that cycle into 12 sections, and they had to round it up to 12 because it was actually 11.86. Like, so they divided it to 12 sections of the orbit of Jupiter. I did not know
Interesting.
that until I read that while we were doing this research. So then I think most of us are familiar with the 12 animals. So the Chinese astrology will do a birth chart and they will do the the year of the animal, right? Like we're in the year of the dragon right now. 2024 is the year of the dragon. So that is I didn't know it was based on Jupiter. Jupiter is a major influencer in Chinese astrology. The Hellenistic astrology, so this is from the 2nd century BCE. Uh, this is where horoscope astrology kind of got its label because horoscopus is the hour marker. And they began to use not just where the sun was in the constellation, but also what planet was ascending on the hour of your birth. So that's where horoscope came in, and that is Hellenistic theory. So the Greeks clearly took information from the Babylonian culture. And for a time, I think most of the cultures in that area were using the 12 zodiac signs and the horoscope as a method of not only predictive future, but also how to tell time. And also the calendars and the timekeeping devices they were used, because it was also based on the equinoxes and the solstice. They were calculating the movement of the planets in the sky.
So this sounds like this is where the rising sign idea
Mm-hmm.
came from, since they were paying attention to what was on the horizon, what was rising at the time of your birth. So
Yeah.
that's really cool.
And that's basically our lineage, is the Hellenistic lineage. So just to briefly talk about Hindu, the oh my gosh, I should have practiced these words. They use the sidereal zodiac. So there are going to be some differences in the Hindu astrological charts and the Western astrological charts. But they also, so they do the 12 equal parts. Each part is 30 degrees. So that's all the same. It's just their starting point shifts, whereas the Western and the Hellenistic, the starting point is the same. And we have 12 houses, and the Western Hellenistic, they have 27 equal divisions of the night sky, each identified by a prominent star, and they call them lunar mansions. How
Oh,
lovely is
wow.
that? Yes.
I
Yes.
like lunar mansion
Yeah.
way more than house.
And then we have Western astrology, and another leader in the history of Western astrology is Ptolemy, Tetrabiblios. That's a continuation of the older Hellenistic and ultimately Babylonian traditions. And what Ptolemy did was the metaphysical principle that mathematical relationships expresses qualities and tones of energy, which manifest in numbers, angles, shapes, sounds, and then we'll say vibrations, characteristics, and all the other values that we use when we're relating to planets and the celestial bodies.
I wonder if this is where transits came into play, because a transit,
Mm.
or um, you have like trines and squares in astrology, and those
Yes.
describe relationships, mathematical relationships. Because if you're looking at the chart and it forms, let's say the sun is squaring Jupiter, those make angles, and it's very, like what you said, mathematical,
Yes.
and those have different meanings, qualities, energies. Some can cause friction and tension, others are a more harmonious alignment. So, very interesting. I'm
It's all,
learning a lot from you,
yeah.
Christina.
It's all math. It's all math. We have a whole podcast on birth charts scheduled. So we will dive into all that information. But yeah, mathematical. It was all math. Just a touch on Jewish astrology. The day is divided into 12 equal hours, and the night is divided into 12 equal hours. And then each hour is assigned an additional information characteristics, along with the other with the day and the month and the year. So they additionally break down the hours of the day, which is
Wow.
amazing, again, to get even more detailed information. And I just want to touch very quickly on psychological astrology. Psychologist astrologer Carl Jung, beginning in the 1920s, began to apply and develop and modify and grow astrology by adding in the horoscope through the archetypes. Essentially, that's what I want to say. If you've come across the phrase archetypes or oracle cards on archetypes or books on archetypes, it was Carl Jung that began to bring those two concepts together.
I'll be talking more about him
Okay.
and some of the studies that he did, but I selected him not only because he's a well known and well, I think, respected
Mm-hmm.
person. He was a skeptic of astrology. And so he kind of started studying astrology from the standpoint of being a skeptic.
Yeah.
But he was also very much a scientist. And he founded the School of Analytical Psychology. So bringing him into this discussion is really interesting, having a scientifically minded individual
Yeah.
who was a skeptic. And we'll talk about what his research found.
Yeah. You can't get too deep into metaphysics without coming across his name in some
Mm-hmm.
way, shape, or form. So, three main types, three main types of astrology. Horoscopic astrology, which is what I mentioned. Uh, Astrology defined by the ascent of the sign that was rising in the east at the time of your birth. It's also called the rising sign. And then the houses are in horoscopic astrology. Then we have natal astrology, which is the birth chart, which is a fantastic and fun and self-reflective and educational type of thing that we'll talk about more in depth with the natal astrology, which is based on your location and time of birth.
Mm-hmm.
And then sun sign astrology, and that's focused on the sun changes every 30 days into another constellation in the night sky, and this what the sun represented to the cultures that focused on this is our drive, our ego, our pride. We'll talk more about sun signs, but that is a lot of popular culture, and maybe the first astrology that most people have been exposed to is sun sign astrology.
Right. Kind of the newspaper
Yeah.
astrology, as I've heard it called in my research.
So
So,
that is a quick little list, history, facts. You know, each one of those individually could be a whole podcast in themselves, but we're just trying to give you some good basic background and some good basic info.
yes. And I want to dive into the question, is astrology even legitimate?
Hmm.
And I want to start with the argument or some thoughts on why astrology is not legitimate. And there's kind of when I'm saying legitimate, and I'll differentiate as I go through this, but you can break that question down a little bit further. Is astrology a science? Is it something that is reliable, something we can replicate? And then the other side of legitimate is sort of asking, well, what's its purpose? Is it giving
Yeah.
us valuable information?
The
And a
why.
lot, exactly. So I do love astrology. I believe in it, but I wanted to hear the other side. And
Hmm.
a lot of the criticisms are that astrology is actually egocentric. And to a degree, I agree. Um,
Yes.
but Christina said something very key, and astrology can be used to reflect more inwardly, but also how you engage with the world, how you relate to what's happening in the world. So just know that is a criticism. Some people will go as far to say is astrology is narcissistic and that the
Mm.
universe is not about you. So,
But we are made of stardust.
and critics will debate you on that as well. Critics can sound really mocking of astrology. I heard in a YouTube lecture that somebody gave that basically you're not an intelligent person if you believe in astrology. And I'll kind of pick that
Hmm.
apart a little bit. But there is some ridicule, sarcasm. I even heard one person say that if you believe in astrology, engage with it in any way, that you are actually engaging with Satan in disguise.
Wow.
Critics will also say that astrology puts people into one of 12 boxes. So I was born in July, the end of July, so I'm a Leo. And by believing in astrology, I'm confined now. I'm put in this box of Leo, and that's all I can ever be. So that is a criticism that comes up. Now, in terms of looking at astrology from a scientific perspective, scientists and astronomers will criticize astrology and say, is it really Mercury in retrograde that's causing cause and effect relationship, or is it just a correlation? And that's a very important question in science. Is
Mm-hmm.
something causing this particular effect, or are they just correlated? And going back to the definition of astrology, there's a lot of human interpretation that goes into reading an astrological chart, reading the signs. You could meet with two different astrologers and hear some of the same, maybe basic principles in your chart, but interpretations can really vary. And so,
Yeah.
from a scientific perspective, what that means is astrology isn't replicable. And in
Yeah.
science, you have the scientific method, and it's very important to start with a hypothesis and be able to prove that hypothesis repeatedly. And often
So
in astrology, that's not the case.
so the mathematical facts of where the planets were on the day and time you were born can be charted. That is math. That is where things actually were. Where people begin to deviate from that is over interpretation, right? And
Precisely.
assignment of values and meanings.
Precisely. And specifically, is what we're experiencing in our daily life and in the world caused by the planets and the stars and their placements? Or is there just a correlation? If we look for meaning, are we finding the meaning and kind of creating that like self fulfilling prophecy? So, as I mentioned, Carl Jung was a skeptic, yet he was open minded and he wanted to understand. He wanted to just know more. And he was one of the first scientists to really provide a lot of scientific data, a lot of rigorous research on astrology. And in one of his studies, he enlisted astrologists from 4 countries, and he wanted to study the birth charts of married couples
Oh my
because
gosh.
astrologers will say certain placements in the birth chart, certain placements of planets in certain signs and houses make certain people more favorable to marriage. So he wanted to look at the charts and see if that was true. And he obtained 966 birth charts and 4 astrologers from different countries. And what he found was 936 of the 966 people did have favorable placements for marriage.
Hmm.
So that sounds pretty good, right? He was like, awesome. But he didn't stop there. He asked a mathematician to basically analyze what are the odds of this just being random, like
Yeah.
happenstance. And those odds were 10 million to 1. But he didn't stop there. He repeated that 3 different times and he got the same results each time.
How about that?
Another study done was by a French astrologer. His name is Michael Gauquelin. And I did practice saying his name. And I also wrote myself a phonetic little way to pronounce it. So Michael.
Listeners, she has it sounded out how to pronounce it in her notes.
So I'll say it again. Michael Gauquelin, French
Gauquelin.
astrologer. And this study was called the Mars effect. And this is a very sort of well-known and famous study. And it kind of ended in a big scandal. So this one's really fun to talk about. Michael Gauquelin was also a skeptic, and he was actually setting out to disprove astrology. And his area of focus in this study was vocational astrology, which can sort of predict your career path. And he looked at 20,000 birth charts of famous people. And what he was looking at, for example, astrologers say that athletes and military professionals typically have Mars conjunct their rising sign. Writers, the moon conjunct their rising sign. So there were sort of these established placements that astrologers said favored certain career paths.
Oh.
So he
Oh, we
took
gotta
20.
we gotta do a podcast on that. That is
Yeah,
fascinating.
super interesting. So he found that the charts of these famous people very much matched what astrologers were saying. And again, he did sort of a self check, and the odds of that being random were 5 million to 1.
Oh gosh.
And this has been replicated by other scientists, but there were also groups. Belgium had a group of skeptics that didn't buy this Mars effect research. So they went in and tried to debunk the Mars effect. And what's kind of funny is this group from Belgium, they got the same results as Michael Gauquelin, but they were embarrassed because they were skeptics. They were like, we want to
Yeah.
disprove what this guy found. So for 8 years, they hid their research results out of being embarrassed.
What?
And then later, an American group set out to do the same thing, to debunk the Mars effect. And that's where this whole scandal erupted. Allegedly, they did have the same results, but what they said publicly was that they could not replicate the Mars effect. But behind the scenes, people were getting fired. There was a whistleblower involved in the study who said, you know, everyone hold your horses. They are releasing falsified results. They're claiming they didn't get the same results, but they did. So,
Wow.
very controversial, but ultimately,
Wow. The Mars effect. The
yeah,
Mars effect.
ultimately it's, been proven, if you will. Um, but the Mars effect is still very controversial because some people reject that the American group actually had the same results as Michael Gauquelin and the Belgium skeptic group. So, very
Wow.
interesting. Just some food for thought there. Um, and what I noticed in my research was that There seems to be more scientific acceptance. And when I'm saying that, I mean like astronomers and even Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Mm,
who is a physicist. There seems to be an acceptance that the season in which someone is born, spring, summer, fall, winter, has an effect on personality, more so than the sun, moon, and stars. So now we're looking more seasonally on Earth and accepting the season impacts personality, not so much the effect of the whole
the
cosmos.
planets. How
And
about
what
that? I always thought there was something going on, like if you had a summer birthday versus a winter birthday versus a spring birthday, there's differences that happen in your personalities and your expectations based on the season of your birth.
precisely, and there's a couple thoughts behind that. And Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about, especially hundreds of years ago, what food was available to you as an infant, what food was available to your mother while she was pregnant with you. So, nutrition is really perhaps a key player in that, more so than your birth chart. So, that was a really interesting perspective that nutrition and the seasons play into our personality. However, there's been research done. Um, People born in January, February, March, schizophrenia is more common in people born in those months. Alcohol
What?
abuse, more common in people born in March, April, May, June, and July. So we're starting to really look at
Huh.
these correlations. I don't know if we can say causation at this time, but there's a definite correlation that scientists are seeing between season and personality and sort of these conditions. Schizophrenia is one, alcohol
Hmm.
abuse was one I looked at, seasonal affective disorder is more common in people born in March and April. So there seems to be something there, and the scientific communities uh, are more accepting of this
Yeah.
seasonal effect.
What's interesting is that all of these medical records and all this medical research, it exists. It's out there. They've been looking for correlations and trying to draw predictive factors for thousands of years. They just have never included star signs, sun signs, moon signs, birth charts. I think other cultures have, but Western
Mm-hmm.
culture has not. That would
Mm-hmm.
be a very, very new application.
And I have a
And yeah, and
couple.
they're just barely finding out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll actually talk about medical astrology in a moment, but yeah, for sure. Another interesting study looked at the birth charts of serial killers, and astrologers say that the 12th house, Pluto, mutable signs, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. But those qualities and placements in the birth chart, according to astrologers, can not really predict, but kind of that nature nurture idea, like your stars are more in line with you being a serial killer if you have certain elements in your chart. And what they did, this study kind of spun off into a TV show, and they had a guest astrologer come on and gave her a stack of charts, and they had some infamous serial killers mixed in, and they said, we want you to find the charts of the serial killers, pick them out.
Yeah.
And she did, with 100% accuracy.
Wow. I want to go look at my birth chart. I
Make
mean,
sure you're not a serial killer.
I know I'm not a serial killer, but I just picked up my sheet to see. I don't have my birth chart with me, but I just picked up my cheat sheet to see what the 12th house was. And I do need to. I mean, that's why I was so excited when we started doing this season of astrology. I'm like, I have so much I want to discover and learn about astrology. I basically know just my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know all the seasons. I want to know all the signs. That is
Right.
fascinating.
Yeah. And, so we've talked about the acceptance of seasons impacting personality. And to take it one step deeper, there seems to be also more acceptance that the moon has influence
Mm-hmm.
over us. So the people that are like, I don't know about astrology, there tends to be an open mindedness towards the moon, at least, impacting humans on Earth. Hippocrates, who was the father of modern medicine, stated that the full moon can increase fear and erratic behavior. And in the 1700s in England, they actually differentiated between lunacy, so lunar, lunacy, tying back to the moon, and insanity. And if you
Oh
committed a
gosh.
crime during the full moon, you got a lesser sentence because they believed the moon had an effect on you, making you more erratic and fearful. And so, crimes, when they were convicting people and sentencing people for crimes committed, they factored in lunacy.
Oh gosh, I love that.
The full moon is correlated with higher rates of suicide, dog bites, ER visits, violent crimes, accidents, and crisis center calls.
Mm-hmm.
Also in the UK, police departments deploy more officers during the full moon for these exact reasons, for these correlations. And we do have an we are able to see like the menstrual cycle of women 28 days, and that's the same as the cycle of the moon. And we do know
Right?
that the moon impacts tides, so there does
Right?
seem to be much more acceptance towards the moon, which for me, I believe that we're all interconnected. So it's hard for me to say the moon has influence over us and the moon has these correlations to human behavior, but nothing else does. Like that to me is sort of a difficult logical thing to say. The moon can impact us, but Mars doesn't. Well, why?
Yeah.
They're both celestial bodies. Why does it stop at the moon? That's just a question you can ponder, but my personal take is I'm not so sure that these influences stop at the moon.
Yeah, it can't be just proximity based because I mean, everything all at once all the time. Was
Right.
that you have to everything everywhere all at once all the time, that these laws don't proximity doesn't matter.
Right.
Pluto is over there and the moon is over here. That time and space and energy doesn't move that way. It
Right.
doesn't matter how close something is.
I just want to talk briefly about
Or
some
I mean it matters, but
applications.
you know what I'm saying. It doesn't
I
matter.
do.
Like
Right.
yeah.
If you believe in energy, that energy can move despite
Yeah.
distance and time.
Yeah.
So, just briefly, I want to talk about some interesting applications of astrology. So, there's financial astrology. The University of Michigan has correlated the full moon and stock returns. Stock returns tend to be lower around the full moon.
Shut
Um,
up. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, the University of Michigan is a very well respected, educational institution. And that study came from there. There's medical astrology, like we kind of already mentioned. And what's fascinating to me is that medical records from the 1600s actually contained astrological charts, and
Oh, nice.
they were being used as a diagnostic tool. And medical astrology led to a lot of the earliest known medical journals, because at the time, doctors weren't taking notes the way they do today. If you showed up to the doctor in the 1600s and you're like, I'm sick, I have a cough, they would hand you some kind of elixir, and that would be that. There wasn't that meticulous note taking and record keeping. But in medical astrology, they were being very thorough, taking notes. There's a lot of information. And so that kind of became the birth of medical journals, which is really interesting. We talked earlier that astrology can be a tool for making predictions, looking at somebody's chart and saying, you're likely to get married, your vocation is likely this. But even astrology can be used for like worldly event predictions.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's a gray area, right? I don't want
Yeah.
to say be cautious of anyone who's offering you predictions, because predictions can be valuable. But what I want to say, I think, is predictions aren't a guarantee of the outcome. We talked about astrology being a tool for self study, and that kind of brings back up that egocentric idea
Yeah.
that astrology is egocentric. But Christina nailed it when she said it's how we relate to the world. So,
Mm-hmm.
looking at your birth chart to understand yourself better, but not getting so roped in that you are self obsessed. I
Yeah.
guess you want to find that balance if this is a practice that speaks to you. Um, you know, Earlier when I mentioned I listened to the talk, and the person said, if you believe in astrology, you're not intelligent. You're letting something external dictate you. It's controlling you. Astrology doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to influence you. You still have free will. Astrology is not a scapegoat. A lot of pop culture will be like, Mercury's in retrograde, so everything bad that
Yeah.
happens to me, I will blame on that.
Yeah. Or I
Astrology is
can't
not a
help it. I
scapegoat.
can't help it. I can't help it. I'm a Gemini. That's just how I relate to people. It's like, no, that's how you know you relate to people, but you're out of balance. There's
Hmm.
always a way to balance your energies or balance your negative tendencies or your positive tendencies. But yes, there is a lot of that in popular culture of just like,
Yes,
oh well, that's that I'm a Scorpio. Oh well, you know.
right. And signs have, this kind of goes back to the idea of astrology puts people in boxes. I'm a Leo, so these are my characteristics, period. Each sign,
You do have good
and
hair.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Isn't that a sign of Leo?
It is because of the lion's mane. Yes, we are very proud of our hair. Um, but each sign has a high vibration and a low vibration. So Leos have good hair. They're charismatic, they're warm, they're caring. Low side is pride, stubbornness. And, I'm a Leo, so I can say that's written in the stars. But who I choose to be within Leo is up to me. I can
Yeah.
choose to be stubborn, or I can choose to be warm.
How
I get
you
to choose.
express, yeah, how
Mhm.
you express your Leo tendencies and attitude, that is completely up to you.
Right.
Yes.
And for me, that's why I love astrology.
Yeah.
My moon is in Taurus. What does that mean? What does that mean in my life, in my interactions with other people, how I interpret what's happening to me? Um, and you get to make that determination for yourself. Like, how do I want to show up? Do I want to embrace the qualities that are of a higher vibration? Or, oh, shoot, upon self reflection, I have noticed I'm, with a Taurus moon, am I overindulging?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I am. I need to start um, doing practices that nurture me instead of seeking the external. So, anyway, we're kind of getting into some fun stuff that we'll cover in future podcasts
Yeah.
when we go over each sign. But that's where I've landed. I don't expect to convince anyone that astrology is real or legitimate. And
That's not what we're trying
if
to do.
this, right. And if it
It's
doesn't vibe with you,
education,
yeah,
education and entertainment. That's what we're
yeah,
trying to do.
yeah. And if it doesn't vibe with you, that's okay. You don't have to go look up your birth chart. That's fine. Maybe you learned something today and you're like, huh, maybe there is a little bit of merit to this.
Yeah.
Um, and then just to where I ended up at the end of my research, um, even if astrology isn't real, even if it's not legitimate, why has
Mm.
astrology endured for thousands of years?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Why are
I
we talking
think,
about it?
right. And I think that answer is, humans are meaning makers. And this is just a framework to understand what's happening within us and around us. And we get to participate in the process of what's happening in our life. And I think astrology is a tool, if it resonates with you, to just have a deeper understanding.
Oh, how did you say that? We are participants in our own life. It's a
Yeah.
way for us to participate in our own life.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So, we have the season of astrology coming up, listeners. We're going to be releasing a podcast on each of the astrological signs, and we're going to go with the year. We're going to go with the year, right? We're going to talk about the season that we're in, do a deeper dive into each of the signs, and talk more about the history, the traits. But, oh, when we talked about high vibration, low vibration, and balance, we're going to talk about that.
Yes.
Self care,
Mm-hmm.
balancing. Yes.
Yes. I'm just scanning.
I
Oh, I
know.
do want to say one more thing.
You have such good notes.
It's one more application of astrology, and I just think it's interesting. I didn't know you could do this until a couple years ago, but you can do astrological charts for things. It's not just for like people. It can be for a marriage, so like the date you got married, and you can do a chart for
Oh,
that.
cute.
Your pets,
Yeah.
the
My new puppy,
formation.
Michael, he's a Gemini
Oh,
like me.
you could do a chart for Michael.
I'm going to.
I believe you. It's so interesting. And I didn't even talk about it, but there's been research done on animals and their astrological signs. And
I believe it.
so there's been research, done on that too. But charts can be made also for the formation of a nation.
Oh,
When
that's
you
so
incorporate
cool.
a business at the date of incorporation, and if you move to a new place.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That's such good stuff. So there it is, astrology. We are going to move into our final little bit here, the oracle cards. So I'm going to pick two cards, or I have had picked 2 cards, have had picked. 2 cards from the Medicine Woman Oracle deck by Catherine Milliard. I'll post a picture on our Instagram page so that you can find this deck if you're interested. And there's 2, so you pick 1 or 2. You ready?
No. Now I am. Sometimes it takes a minute, but I
know.
got it.
Sometimes it's like I get the message right away, and other times I'm like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so card 1, personal power. I encourage you to be the master of your own destiny. I am the medicine woman of personal power, and I release all memories of submission. My gift is woman's great power, which is located in her belly, where the seeds of the great sacred dream are nested and where her children come to life. In women's heart burns the sacred fire, which they need to promote their talents and knowledge. I am she who gives you the courage and boldness to live the life you truly want, not the life others expect you to lead. With me at your side, you will awaken your potential for growth, to unfurl your creative energy. You are the master of your destiny. Here's the guidance from personal power. The time has come to rise up and take your rightful place. The medicine woman benevolently asks you, is there a situation in which you overadapt? Is there someone to whom you cede your power? You run the real risk of not living your own life. You don't need anyone else's approval. Be bold. Be who you truly are. Develop your talents and act. Commit to holding aloft your values, peace, truth, and the planet's conservation. You are supported. Move forward in the full presence of your soul's qualities and validate your choices. Connect to this archetype and decide how to take back your personal power. That was card 1. Card 2 is the Bison Totem. Life is showering you with its abundance. I am the spirit of the bison. I ensure you will want for nothing. Emblem of winter, I bring you my support in tough times. The symbolism, keeper of the northern door. The bison shows the way towards the sharing and giving of ourselves. He reminds us that this is a world of abundance and teaches us to be satisfied with what we already have. Life is generous. The bison teaches us to appreciate our resources and use what we need respectfully. Traditionally, tribes honored the sacred animal that provided for them with its skin, meat, ligaments, and bones. The bison carries the spirit of community. Together, we are stronger. Message: show respect for and gratitude towards life. In return, life will give you everything you need in abundance. Okay. One final section, the guidance. When the bison appears in a reading, it is for you to question your relationship with life. The bison invites you to become aware of the abundance around you. Everything is already here, right at your fingertips. You may be experiencing a time of shortage that worries you. By showing greater gratitude for what you already have, such as family, friends, and material possessions, you will find a new balance and the ability to honor life. By showing generosity, you will initiate a virtuous cycle. Develop your inner riches and find your community. The medicines of the bison are solidarity and empathy. To connect to your animal guide, reaffirm your trust in life and its generosity to nourish a deep feeling of abundance.
That one gave me goosebumps.
I love this deck. I love it.
Yeah.
And we'll post
And
pictures.
mhm.
But I hope those cards, and again, another moment in time with our oracle cards talking about these fascinating subjects.
Yeah. And I even heard little messages that applied to what we were talking about today.
I did too.
So, yeah.
I did
Yeah.
too.
It's really cool how that just seems to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those and teaching me, Christina.
I know you taught me. That is the beauty of this podcast is we learn as we are researching, we learn as we're talking, and we learn as we're sitting back and reflecting. And we hope you are too, our listeners. We hope you are too. We hope you are getting interested. And even as a believer or a neutral person or a skeptic, that you just go out and engage in this information or go out and engage in this topic and find out more about the world and find out more about yourself, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So that I think concludes our podcast for today. And we will be back next week with a new episode. And we're excited to talk to you again then.
Thank you so much for joining us and listening. And be safe, take care, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Radical. The Radical is written and produced by Nicole and Christina.
Listener questions can be emailed to us at theradicalpodnc@gmail.com.
Our Instagram is The Radical Pod.
Music by Van Horton. His Instagram is Van Horton Music.